It's been buried, possibly under a mountain of corruption, governmental failure, and a sad lack of empathy. Ubuntu was supposed to be the heartbeat of South Africa, but it's now as lifeless as a conversation about load shedding at a braai. Today I'm here to tell you why Ubuntu as we know it is gone, and how the very people who should have been protecting it are the ones who killed it Jeffrey Dahmer style. Let's be real for a second. A lot of you watching this video probably don't even know what Ubuntu is. If you're under 25, you might even think it's some software program or some kind of African crypto scam that failed in 2021. Spoiler alert, it's not. Ubuntu is or was a philosophy that says I am because we are. It's basically the philosophy of helping one another and standing united as a people and as a nation. All races, all nationalities, you get the idea by now. It's about interconnectedness, community, and mutual care. You know, those warm, fuzzy things your granny used to tell you when you were busy glued to your phone during family lunch, but then you later realized you weren't paying attention to her at all anyway. So why don't people know what Ubuntu is? Well, for one, the younger generation doesn't care. They're too busy TikToking, chasing the bag, or arguing over whether Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo is the GOAT, even though they're both old now and were in their primes when they weren't even born. Ask a teenager about Ubuntu, and they'll probably say, "Is that a new update for Fortnite or something?" And honestly, who can blame them? Who? They've grown up in a world where greed, corruption, and individualism are the order of the day. They've seen leaders steal from the poor firsthand and fund lavish lifestyles, their own lavish lifestyles, and they've learned that helping others doesn't always lead to a better life. It often leads to getting scammed. The idea of Ubuntu feels like ancient history to them, like something people in the 90s cared about while wearing oversized suits and dancing to Brenda Fassie and Yvonne Chaka Chaka. That's basically the reality now. Now let's break this down. Ubuntu, the African philosophy that speaks to our shared humanity, is rooted in the idea that, like I said earlier, I am because we are. It is a beautiful idea, really, that if we succeed together, the well-being of one is tied to the well-being of all. You know, stuff like that. It's like walking down the street and then you see someone struggling with their bags or an old lady trying to cross the road. You stop and help because you know that if you were the one struggling, you'd want the same. Ubuntu was supposed to be the absolute antidote to the poison of apartheid. It was supposed to bind us as a nation, to heal the wounds, and to create a society where no one is left behind. It was the glue that was supposed to hold us together. After the end of apartheid, people spoke about Ubuntu as if it were the magic word that would fix everything in South Africa. This country was supposed to be the example of how people of different races, backgrounds, and histories could come together and build something better, hence the name, the Rainbow Nation. And yes, I'm better than your history teacher. But instead, we've seen a breakdown. Ubuntu has gone from being the foundation of our nation to an old weathered slogan on a government office that nobody really believes in anymore. Kind of like the La Sizwe situation. We've got politicians who can't pronounce the word right, let alone live by it. It's become as irrelevant as Bheki Cele every time he talks about the SAPS. So how did Ubuntu go from being the hero of our nation to sad afterthought? One reason, the so-called woke generation. Oh, you know who I'm talking about. The ones who cancel people for breathing too loudly or for not knowing the correct term for everything. These are the same people who will write long Instagram posts about how we need to uplift each other, but then they'll go to a restaurant and treat the waiter like dirt because their soy milk latte had regular milk instead. Ubuntu means caring for one another. But how are we supposed to do that when everyone's too busy being fake activists on Twitter? It's hard to uplift the community when half the country is subtweeting each other. You know what I'm saying? Because here's the harsh truth no one says except me. The woke generation talks a big game about community, but their actions don't match their words. Ubuntu isn't about hashtags or retweets. It's about rolling up your sleeves and actually helping someone without expecting clout in return. But that's boring, right? Why feed the hungry when you can post a motivational reel with sad piano music and call it a day? And as much as the woke culture is responsible for stabbing Ubuntu to its absolute death, it was your government that gave it the knife to do so. Wokeness killed Ubuntu. Yes, I said it. Summer Sambit said wokeness killed Ubuntu, Jeffrey Dahmer style. But it was your beloved government that taught them how to do it. Because the government didn't just kill Ubuntu by neglect. No, It was a full-on cold-blooded Moses Sithole type of murder, and let me explain. Take a moment to think about our government for a second. It was meant to be the protector of your democracy, the defender of your human rights, the champions of Ubuntu, long story short. But what have they done instead? They've taken the spirit of Ubuntu, the very philosophy that should have guided their every decision, and sold it off to the highest bidder. They've taken their wallets, shoved them in front of your faces, and told us to just treat them as they emptied the country. Shoved them in front of our faces and told us to just treat them as they emptied the country's pockets. It's like they took Ubuntu, locked it in a cage, and charged us entry fees to even look at it. And do you know what the worst part is? They don't even care. The ANC, the very party that promised to fight for a free, united South Africa, they promised us a country where we could live together, work together, and grow together as a united nation. But now, well, the only thing they're growing is their bank accounts, because it's hard to see Ubuntu when the government is too busy swiping the country's credit card like it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. So how can we talk about unity when every day seems like a new scandal, a new Sbusiso Lawrence, a new disaster, and a new mismanagement of funds? How can Ubuntu survive when those meant to lead us are playing Monopoly with our very lives as we speak? Speaking of Monopoly, I want to address the elephant in the room, or more like the corrupt, oily politician in the back of the room, laughing while the rest of us are left to pick up the scraps because he ate all the bread. Because corruption in South Africa is not just a problem, it's the problem. Every time we talk about a better future here, corruption will stroll in, throw a Molotov cocktail into the conversation, and laugh as we scramble to put out the flames. The ANC, which should have been the shining beacon of hope for the oppressed, has instead become the laughing stock of the world. Imagine the government as a parent telling you, eat your vegetables, they're good for you, while simultaneously having a belly as big as Ace Mahashule's and raiding the fridge and eating the dessert that they've hidden from you. That is the hypocrisy of our leaders. When you look at the extravagant lifestyles of some of these politicians, living in mansions, driving around in Lamborghinis, buying one for their wives and their kids, while the rest of the country struggles to make ends meet, giving them $350 for grants, it's clear, Ubuntu is dead. How can we call ourselves united when a few people are living like kings while the rest of us can't even afford to pay for a loaf of white bread? The hypocrisy is so thick here, you could spread it on a sandwich and cut it with a scissor. But the death of Ubuntu isn't the fault of corrupt politicians. It's also the reality of the South Africans that exist right now. One is a country where people can't afford to live, and the other is a place where the elite sip champagne while watching the sunset over their private golf courses. There is no we in this. The only thing that unites us here is the fact that we all share the same potholes on the roads. Ubuntu was meant to break down these divisions, to make sure that no one was left behind. But today, those divides are growing. The wealth gap in South Africa is wider than the Atlantic Ocean. We are a nation divided by class, race, and economic status, and whoever's wearing fishnets and who isn't. If Ubuntu is about unity, then how can we call ourselves that if we deliberately exclude those we have promised for that transition? Now let's talk about service delivery, or should I say service non-delivery. It's hard to believe in Ubuntu when your local government can't even deliver clean water or reliable electricity in a city like Johannesburg. How can we talk about unity when people are left to suffer in the dark, literally and figuratively? In a country where such wealth and resources, it's absurd that we're still dealing with water shortages and regular load shedding. Think about it like this. We were told that Ubuntu would bring us together to overcome challenges. But the government's idea of overcoming challenges is to tell us, sorry, no service today. But it seems like the only thing the government cares about is looking after itself and talking about big names like Sol Plaatje and them who have died long time ago just to elevate themselves for another vote. Now let's turn our attention to the youth, because these are the people who were supposed to have inherited this beautiful new world of equality and opportunity. But what have they really gotten instead? Well, you tell me. A lackluster education system, unemployment, and a sense that the government has given up on them. The youth of today are like a band of hopeful souls standing in line for a concert, only to find out that the doors are locked and the tickets were sold to the highest bidder. Ubuntu was supposed to offer them a path forward, a chance to thrive, but instead they've been left in a perpetual state of limbo. How can the youth believe in Ubuntu when they see the older generation doing little to improve their lives? They're the ones who have been left behind. And I have to ask, is that really what you fought for? You tell me. So where does this leave us as a nation? Shut your ass up, I'm making a video. Well, it leaves us as a country divided by the very things Ubuntu was meant to eliminate. The corruption is rampant. The elite continue to thrive while the majority suffer. The Oppenheimers. The youth are hopeless, and the government has abandoned the very principles it promised to uphold. The Ruperts. Ubuntu is dead. The Mutsepes. So Ubuntu has been buried. We all agree on that now, and no one seems to care. Because the only thing that's united us lately is anger. Anger over the corruption, anger over the inequality, anger over the GBV, and anger over the broken promises. Because we can't keep pretending that Ubuntu is alive when the reality is that it's been buried under a pile of hypocrisy and failed policies. At this point, if we said Ubuntu was still alive, we'd be lying as much as Cyril Ramaphosa, and also our noses would be growing like the Pinocchios we deserve to be. So I'm sure you're asking yourself, what's next for South Africa? I don't know. But if we get back to any semblance of Ubuntu, we're going to need more than just a shift in policies, right? We need a cultural revolution, a whole return to the basic idea that I am because we are. The government must stop talking and start walking the walk. They need to lead by example, not just in their speeches, but in their actions. They need to stop pretending they are too busy to care. And instead, they should actually show us that they're willing to fight for the country's future the way those who fought against apartheid actively did. It's like we're living in a soap opera where every new season introduces a new villain, but the plot always ends the same. Corruption, neglect, and a nation left holding the bag. So it's easy to laugh at this point, isn't it? After all, we've become so used to the absurdity of it all that it's almost comical. I mean, think about it. You live in a country where a politician can be caught with his hand in a cookie jar, and the only thing that happens is that he gets a slap on the wrist and a promotion too. This is the reality we are stuck with. The reality where Ubuntu is the relic of the past, and all we are left with is the hollow promise of something better and 14-year-olds talking on Instagram. But here's the thing. There's still hope. There's still a chance to revive Ubuntu. But it's going to take all of us, not just the politicians. Because we need to stop waiting for them to change and start holding ourselves accountable. If you and I want to live in a country where Ubuntu isn't just a word we throw around in speeches like Cyril, then we have to start living it every single day. Because Ubuntu may be dead, but it doesn't have to stay that way. So, if Ubuntu is dead, what do we do now? Is all hope lost? Of course not. The first step is to acknowledge that we, the people, are the ones who can bring it back to life. The government might have buried it, but we can dig it up and resurrect it. This is not a call for blind optimism, but for realistic awakening. You know what I'm saying? You and I have the power to change things in our own communities, help those around us, and start acting with the compassion and unity Ubuntu called for in the first place. So maybe it's time to stop waiting for leaders at the top to fix things. Because they've shown you time and time again that they are more interested in their pockets and in preserving their power than in improving our lives. So, take Ubuntu back, but this time, you must make it a grassroots effort. Let's show the government that the people are capable of living up to the values they have abandoned. Ubuntu is about more than just the government or the economy. It's about how we treat each other on a day-to-day basis. It's in the small actions, helping the old lady crossing the road, sharing your food with your neighbor, offering a helping hand, sharing your PlayStation with your friend, and most importantly, calling out the hypocrisy when you see it. It's about making sure that we hold ourselves accountable before we start pointing fingers at each other. Okay? We can bring Ubuntu back by embodying it ourselves. So, good people, the real question is, do we want to? Do we want to live in a society where we can honestly say that we can care for each other? Or are we fine with this? Are we content to let Ubuntu rest in peace, Undertaker style, while we argue over things that divide us further? I want to leave you with this one today. Ubuntu is dead, but it doesn't have to stay that way. You have the power to bring it back to life, but only if you're willing to make the changes necessary to bring about real unity. It's not enough to sit around and wait for the government to fix things. They've already shown they won't. So if you want Ubuntu to thrive again, you need to start living it. You know what I'm saying? So you better get to work, both young and old. The old and wise should be more than prepared to reintroduce Ubuntu for the young to look at and implement in their lives, because the government sure as hell won't do it. But as I've said in many videos of mine, charity, even Ubuntu, starts at home. So it's time we stop talking and start doing, because the future of Ubuntu is in your hands.